Daddy, I sold the farm. 4 words. That's all Patricia said before she dropped the sales contract on my hospital bed and walked out. No explanation, no discussion, just a piece of paper that would blow up her life in exactly 30 days when the oil survey results came back. She had no idea what she'd just done. I'm David Hartwell. I'm 59 years old, and I just watched my daughter sell 640 acres of Nebraska farmland that's been in our family for 3 generations. I looked down at the contract while the chemo drip continued its slow work in my arm. Fancy legal paper, the kind they use when they want to make big money look legitimate. Her signature at the bottom, confident and sharp. The sale price right there in black and white, $1.2 million. The farm was worth $2.8 million on any honest appraisal, and she'd just given it away for less than half. Patricia thought she was being smart, maybe even merciful. Get the old man out of farming before the cancer killed him. Convert the dead asset into liquid cash that could pay for treatments, make life easier for Mom, set up college funds for the grandkids she hadn't given us yet. What she didn't know was that the mineral rights weren't included in that sale. And what she really didn't know was that Continental Energy had been surveying our section for 6 months, preparing to offer $15 million for a 20-year oil lease. The biggest discovery in eastern Nebraska, sitting right underneath our corn and soybean fields. The buyers were the Palmer family, specifically Trevor Palmer, Patricia's husband, the real estate developer from Chicago. He had plans to subdivide our 640 acres into 200 residential lots. Hartwell Meadows, they were going to call it, premium rural lifestyle community, starting at $180,000 per lot. He'd done the math on his potential profits, probably figured he was stealing the farm for pennies on the dollar. I signed the acknowledgement form without saying a word. My hand didn't shake, even though the chemo had left me weak and my fingers sometimes trembled when I thought no one was looking. I was sitting in Nebraska Methodist Hospital, 3 days into my 3rd round of treatment. The oncologist said I was responding well, that we'd caught it early enough. But Patricia stood there like she was planning my funeral. She waited for me to argue, to fight back, to play the part of the stubborn old farmer who couldn't let go. Instead, I just looked at her and said, "I hope you read the deed carefully." She frowned, that same expression she'd had since she was 5 and couldn't understand why the cows needed milking every single day. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing you need to worry about. You're the one with the MBA." That stung, and I could see it in her eyes. Patricia had moved to Chicago 15 years ago, right after college. University of Nebraska business degree, summa cum laude, everything we'd worked to give her. Met Trevor at some downtown networking event, married him within a year. They had this life in Lincoln Park, high-rise condo with a lake view, both of them pulling down 6-figure salaries in their respective firms. She'd come back to visit maybe twice a year, always talking about how we needed to modernize the operation or maximize our return on investment. She spoke about the farm like it was an underperforming stock in her portfolio, something that needed fixing or selling. Never seemed to understand that some things were worth more than their market value. "Daddy, I'm trying to help," she said, her voice softer now. "The medical bills alone are going to be enormous. And what happens if—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the words that would make my mortality real. "If I die?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." I handed the form back to her. "Patricia, your great-grandfather bought this land with his Army discharge pay in 1943. Your grandfather worked it through droughts and floods and farm crises that would have broken lesser men. I've put 35 years of my life into this ground. It's not just an investment. It's also not a pension plan," she said, falling back into her business voice. "Land values are high right now. This might be the best offer we'll see for years." After she left, I called my wife Carol from the hospital phone. She was back at the farm, probably in the kitchen starting dinner, maybe looking out the window at the corn that was coming up strong this year. We'd had good rain in May, and the fields looked promising. "David, how are you feeling today?" "Patricia just sold the farm." The silence stretched long enough that I thought we'd lost connection. Then, "What do you mean she sold it?" "Used the power of attorney, sold all 640 acres to Trevor's development company for $1.2 million. Carol had been my wife for 33 years. She'd been through 2 Marine deployments when I was active duty, through Dad's sudden heart attack when we took over the farm in 1989, through Mom's long fight with Alzheimer's. She'd seen me handle crises that would have broken other men. But this was different. Can she legally do that? Apparently. We signed those papers when I started chemo, remember? In case something happened to me during treatment. But you're not dying, David. Dr. Rodriguez said the scans look good. The treatment's working, I know, but Patricia doesn't see it that way. Carol was quiet for a moment, and I could picture her standing in our kitchen, probably gripping the phone a little too tight. What about the mineral rights? That's my girl. 33 years of marriage, and she still thought like a farmer's daughter. Her dad had run 320 acres outside Omaha before the suburbs swallowed it up in the 1980s. She understood that land wasn't just what you could see on the surface, still ours. She sold the surface rights only. And the Continental Survey? Results come back in 30 days. Maybe less. David, if they find what they think they'll find, I know, $15 million minimum for a 20-year lease. Could be more if the formation's as good as they suspect. Patricia has no idea. None. Trevor either. They think they bought farmland to turn into suburban housing. What they actually bought was the right to put houses on top of the biggest oil discovery in eastern Nebraska history. I could hear Carol moving around the kitchen, probably starting dinner, even though her world had just shifted underneath her feet. That was Carol. When crisis hit, she cooked, fed people, kept things normal while everything else fell apart. What are you going to do? Exercise the right of first refusal. Buy it back at the same price they paid. You think they'll go for that? They won't have a choice. Not when they understand what sitting on top of an active oil drilling operation will do to their development plans. Here's what you need to understand about our farm, and why Patricia's sale was like lighting a fuse she couldn't see. Raymond Hartwell bought this land in 1943 with his Army discharge pay and a GI loan. 640 acres of prime corn and soybean ground, with a creek running through the northwest corner and timber on the south section that had never been touched by a plow. Ray was smart in ways that didn't show up in formal education. He'd worked in the East Texas oil fields before the war, back when they were pulling black gold out of the ground with equipment that looked like medieval torture devices. He knew what to look for, the geological signs, the way water moved through rock, the subtle hints that suggested what might be hiding thousands of feet below the surface. When he bought the land, he structured the deed like a man who'd seen the future. Surface rights and mineral rights as separate entities, with specific language that protected both. Hartwell family name, completely separate from any future land sales. He told my father, "The land will feed you, David, but what's under the land will make you rich someday. Don't ever let them go together." Dad taught me the same lesson when I came home from the Marines in 1987. I'd done 2 tours, learned about logistics and leadership and how to stay calm when everything was going to hell around you. Skills that turned out to be pretty useful for farming, actually. When I took over the operation in 1989 after Dad's heart attack, he walked me out to the back 40 and showed me the geological survey maps Ray had kept in the farmhouse safe. "Your grandfather was right about a lot of things," Dad said, pointing to the contour lines and formation markers that meant nothing to most people but told a story to anyone who knew how to read them. "There's oil under here, maybe gas, too. The technology wasn't there in his time, but someday it will be." That someday turned out to be now. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing had opened up formations that were impossible to reach when Ray was learning the oil business. Continental Energy had been quietly buying up mineral rights across 3 counties, preparing for what their geologists believed would be the biggest horizontal drilling project in Nebraska history. The first contact had come 6 months ago, right before my diagnosis. A polite letter from Continental's land department, asking about mineral rights availability. Standard language, professional but not pushy. They knew better than to rush farmers who'd been thinking in generations, while oil companies thought in quarters. I'd responded that we weren't interested in selling the rights outright, but we might consider a lease agreement under the right terms. The negotiations had been slow, careful, respectful. Continental wanted to be absolutely sure about the geological data before making any major commitments. Their preliminary surveys showed promising formations, the same shale deposits that had made millionaires out of wheat farmers in North Dakota and cattlemen in Texas. Dr. Rodriguez knocked on my hospital room door while I was still on the phone with Carol. He was a good man, maybe 45, with the kind of steady confidence that made you believe him when he said you were going to be fine. "David, how are you feeling today? Any nausea from this morning's treatment?" "Some. Nothing I can't handle." He checked my chart, made some notes. Your blood work looks good. White cell count is responding exactly like we want to see. I think we're going to beat this thing. That was the difference between Dr. Rodriguez and Patricia. He saw someone who was fighting and winning. She saw someone who was dying and needed to be managed accordingly. Both of them meant well, but only one of them understood that I wasn't ready to cash out just yet. After he left, I went back to my conversation with Carol. The legal side is solid, I told her. Ray built the right of first refusal into every deed transfer since 1943. It's been sitting there waiting for exactly this situation. What about Patricia? She's going to fight this. Maybe, but fighting legal reality is expensive, and Trevor's going to figure out pretty quickly that his development dreams just turned into a nightmare. I could hear the dinner timer going off in the background. Carol making pot roast probably, the way she did when she needed to keep her hands busy and her mind focused on something she could control. I got out of the hospital 2 days later. Carol picked me up in our old Chevy Silverado, the same truck I'd been driving for 12 years. Some things you don't replace until they're completely worn out, and that truck had plenty of good miles left in it. We drove home through country I'd known my whole life, rolling hills covered in young corn, farmsteads that had been there since my grandfather's time, the kind of landscape that changes with the seasons but never really changes at all. When we pulled into our gravel driveway, I saw Trevor's BMW parked by the machine shed. Black, expensive, detailed to showroom shine even though he'd driven it down our dusty township road. He was standing near the barn talking on his phone, probably with investors or contractors, gesturing at our buildings like he was already planning their demolition. Trevor was 40 years old, the kind of man who wore $200 jeans to visit farms because he thought that made him look casual. He'd grown up in suburban Chicago, son of an insurance executive, never worked with his hands, or understood that some things couldn't be managed with spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. To Trevor, our farm was just raw material waiting to be processed into profit. He saw us coming and ended his call, walking over with that confident smile he probably practiced in mirrors. "David, good to see you up and around. How are you feeling?" His handshake was firm but soft. No calluses, no evidence of real work. "Fine, Trevor. What brings you out here?" "Just checking on our investment. Patricia wanted me to assess the development potential while you were getting treatment." I looked around at the land Ray had bought with his discharge pay, that Dad had worked through farm crises and recessions, that I'd been improving for 35 years. To Trevor, it was just development potential. "Find what you were looking for?" "Actually, yes. The topography is perfect for residential development. We're thinking 200 lots initially, maybe 250 if we can use the timber section for a park area. Very marketable to young families looking for rural lifestyle without the farming complications. Rural lifestyle without the farming complications. That's how city people talked about the country, like it was some kind of theme park instead of a place where people worked and lived and raised families for generations. "You run a soil composition test yet?" "We will during due diligence." "Why?" "Just curious. This ground has some interesting characteristics." Trevor looked puzzled but didn't ask for details. He spent another hour walking the property lines, taking pictures with his phone, making notes in a leather portfolio. I watched him from the kitchen window while Carol fixed lunch, measuring lot sizes and planning street layouts, standing on top of $15 million worth of oil reserves and seeing nothing but future suburban driveways. "He has no idea," Carol said, setting a sandwich in front of me. "None. Look at him out there calculating profit margins while he's standing on the biggest oil discovery in the county." Carol sat down across from me with her own lunch. "What's he really like? As a person, I mean, not just as Patricia's husband." I thought about that. Trevor wasn't evil, exactly. He was just a product of his environment, raised to think everything had a price, that success meant turning assets into cash as quickly as possible. He'd probably been a decent enough kid who grew up in a world where quarterly earnings mattered more than generational thinking. He's what happens when you teach someone to see price but not value. Patricia probably learned some of that from him, but she got the foundation from us. Trevor never had the foundation to begin with. Think he really loves her? Think he loves the idea of her. Smart woman, good family, solid Midwestern values. Looks good in his world, but I don't think he understands her any better than he understands this farm. That evening, I went to my office and pulled out the Continental Energy correspondence. The folder was thick now. 6 months of careful negotiations, geological surveys, legal reviews. the kind of patient process that oil companies used when they were serious about a long-term investment. The first letter had come in February, right before my diagnosis. Standard inquiry about mineral rights availability, professionally written but not pushy. Continental had been operating in Nebraska for 15 years, mostly small operations, but their geological team believed they'd identified something significant in our area. I'd responded that we weren't interested in selling the rights outright, but we might consider a lease agreement under the right terms. The response had been immediate. They weren't looking to buy, they were looking to partner with landowners who understood the value of long-term relationships. The negotiations had proceeded slowly, respectfully. Continental's land manager, Kevin Walsh, was a Nebraska native who understood that farmers thought in decades, not quarters. He'd grown up on a ranch outside North Platte, served in the Army, then got a geology degree on the GI Bill. The kind of man you could trust because he'd been where you were. Their preliminary surveys showed promising formations at depth, the same Niobrara shale that had transformed parts of Colorado and Wyoming. Horizontal drilling technology could access reserves that had been impossible to reach when Ray was learning about oil in East Texas. The estimated recoverable reserves were staggering, potentially 200 million barrels from a multi-well development program. At current oil prices, even conservative projections suggested our royalty payments could exceed $50 million over the life of the field. The lease itself would provide $1.6 million annually for 20 years, regardless of production levels. It was the kind of money that could set up our family for generations, the same way Ray's original land purchase had provided security for 80 years. But money wasn't the only consideration. Continental's development plan included environmental protections, water table monitoring, and restoration guarantees. They understood that farmers needed to maintain agricultural operations alongside energy development. Trevor's development plan included none of those considerations, just maximum residential density and maximum short-term profit. The final survey results were scheduled to arrive within the week. Continental's geological team had been running seismic tests and core samples for months, building a three-dimensional picture of what lay beneath our fields. If their projections were correct, we were sitting on one of the largest undeveloped oil reserves in the Great Plains. I called Kevin Walsh that evening to check on the timeline. "David, how are you feeling? We heard about your treatment through the agricultural grapevine. Farmers talk, you know." That was the difference between Kevin and Trevor. Kevin understood that rural communities were networks of relationships built over generations. When one farmer got sick, others stepped up to help with harvest or livestock. When someone needed equipment or labor, neighbors appeared without being asked. Trevor saw customers and transactions. Kevin saw people and partnerships. Better every day, thanks. I wanted to give you a heads up about something. There's been a development with the surface rights. I explained Patricia's sale to Trevor, the development plans, the legal complications that were about to unfold. "That's problematic," Kevin said after a long pause. "We can't drill through residential development. Our environmental permits don't cover that kind of surface usage. You won't have to. I'm going to exercise the right of first refusal. You have that option? Ray built it into every deed transfer since 1943. Family gets first chance to buy back at the same price and terms as any outside sale, even if you didn't know about the original sale. The law requires notice to all deed holders. Patricia sold surface rights only. I still hold mineral rights, which makes me a legal deed holder. Her attorney should have contacted me before closing." Kevin was quiet for a moment, probably running through the legal implications. "When will you exercise the option?" "As soon as your survey results confirm what we both think is down there. And if this Trevor character refuses to sell back, then he'll be developing residential real estate on top of an active oil drilling operation. I don't think his Chicago investors will appreciate that combination." The conversation reminded me why I'd trusted Continental from the beginning. Kevin understood that mineral development was a partnership, not a conquest. He'd grown up in ranch country where handshake agreements still meant something, where your word was your bond and your reputation followed you for generations. The survey results arrived on a Thursday morning. Kevin called me before 8 a.m., his voice barely containing excitement. "David, you need to sit down for this. That good? Better than good. We're looking at the largest shale oil formation discovered in Nebraska history. Conservative estimate is 250 million barrels recoverable using current horizontal drilling technology. Your section sits right in the geological sweet spot." I did the math quickly. At $60 per barrel and 18% royalties, we were looking at $2.7 billion in total reserves. Even if oil prices dropped to $40 per barrel, our lifetime royalties would exceed $180 million. Kevin, I think it's time to have that conversation with my son-in-law. David, there's something else. Continental's board approved a premium lease structure for your section. Instead of standard $2,500 per acre annually, they're offering $4,000 per acre for 20 years. That's $2.56 million annually just in lease payments, regardless of production levels. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2.56 million annually, guaranteed for 20 years. Plus royalties that could reach $10 million per year if production met projections. Patricia had sold a $300 million asset for $1.2 million. Send me the official results, Kevin. I need documentation for the legal proceedings. Already in the mail. David, congratulations. Your grandfather would be proud. After hanging up, I sat in my office looking out at the fields where Ray had walked 80 years ago, seeing something that nobody else could see. The old Marine had been right about everything. The land, the oil, the need to protect both for future generations. Carol found me there an hour later. That was Kevin Walsh, I told her. The survey results are in. And 250 million barrels, biggest discovery in state history. We're sitting on approximately $300 million worth of oil reserves. Carol sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. We'd been farmers our entire lives, living comfortably but carefully, always aware that one bad crop year or equipment failure could put us in financial trouble. The kind of money Kevin was talking about was impossible to comprehend. What does this mean for us? For Patricia? It means Patricia just made the most expensive mistake in Nebraska history. And it means Trevor's about to get an education in reading contracts before signing them. Are you going to tell her? I thought about that. Patricia was my daughter, and despite everything, I wanted to protect her from the magnitude of her error. But she was also 36 years old with an MBA, married to a man who made million-dollar decisions for a living. They'd chosen to treat me like a dying old man who needed management instead of consultation. Not yet. Let Trevor figure it out first. Maybe he'll learn something about respecting the people whose land he's trying to steal. Carol studied my face. David, don't let this become about revenge. Patricia made a mistake, but she thought she was helping. I know she did. But Carol, this isn't just about Patricia or Trevor or even the money. Ray built something here that was supposed to last for generations. Patricia tried to sell it to developers who would have destroyed everything he worked for. Sometimes people need to learn that actions have consequences. The phone rang before Carol could respond. The caller ID showed a Chicago area code I didn't recognize. Mr. Hartwell, this is Jennifer Morrison, legal counsel for Palmer Development Group. Mr. Palmer says you've made some claims about purchasing rights on the property his company recently acquired from your daughter. That's correct. The family right of first refusal clause. We'll need to research that claim. In the meantime, I should inform you that my client has significant financial commitments based on this property acquisition. Then your client should have done better due diligence before making those commitments. I told Jennifer Morrison. There was a pause on the line. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from professional courtesy to something sharper. Mr. Hartwell, I should warn you that attempting to interfere with a completed real estate transaction could expose you to significant legal liability. Ma'am, I'm not interfering with anything. I'm exercising a legal right that's been recorded in the county courthouse since 1943. If your client didn't research the deed restrictions before purchasing, that's a failure of his due diligence, not my problem. We'll be in touch. She hung up before I could respond. Carol had been listening to my end of the conversation, and she shook her head. City lawyers. They think they can intimidate farmers with legal threats. Jennifer Morrison doesn't know she's dealing with a Marine who's been farming for 35 years. I've handled worse problems than an overpriced Chicago attorney. That afternoon, word started spreading through the community. Rural areas are like that. News travels fast, especially when it involves money, family disputes, or both. By evening, my phone was ringing with calls from neighbors who'd heard various versions of what was happening. Tom Bradley called first. He farmed 480 acres adjacent to our north section, and we'd been sharing equipment and labor during harvest for 20 years. Tom was 67, a Vietnam veteran who understood loyalty and long-term thinking. David, Heard there's some complications with your land sale. Anything I can help with? Appreciate that, Tom. It's complicated, but I think we'll work it out. Word is, there might be oil involved. That true? Tom had earned the right to ask direct questions. When I'd been laid up with a broken leg 10 years ago, he'd harvested our corn without being asked, refused payment, and said that's what neighbors did for each other. Continental Energy's been doing surveys. Results look promising. How promising? Promising enough that Patricia's going to regret selling to her husband's development company. Tom was quiet for a moment. David, if there's really oil under your ground, it's going to change everything around here. Property values, traffic, the whole character of the community. That was something I'd been thinking about since Kevin's call. Oil development brought jobs and money, but it also brought changes that weren't always welcome. Increased truck traffic on rural roads, workers from out of state who didn't understand local customs, industrial activity in agricultural areas. Tom, Continental's committed to working with local landowners. They're not some fly-by-night operation. They've been in Nebraska for 15 years, and they understand that farming comes first. What about Trevor's development plans? Houses and oil wells don't mix. That's Trevor's problem to solve. He bought the surface rights without researching what was underneath. Now he gets to explain to his investors why their suburban development is sitting on top of an oil field. After Tom hung up, I got similar calls from 3 other neighbors. Word was definitely spreading, and people were asking questions. In rural communities, major changes affected everyone. If our section became the center of oil development, every farmer in the township would see impacts on their property values, their operations, their way of life. Carol made dinner while I handled the calls, and we ate quietly while I thought through the implications. The money from Continental would set us up for life, but money wasn't the only consideration. We'd lived in this community for 35 years, raised Patricia here, built relationships that mattered more than financial returns. "What are you thinking about?" Carol asked. "How this changes things. Not just for us, but for everyone around here. Worried about the community impact?" "Some. Oil development done right can help everyone. More tax revenue, better roads, economic opportunities for young people who might otherwise leave for the cities. But it has to be managed carefully. And Trevor's development would have destroyed the agricultural character permanently. At least oil development is temporary. Wells produce for 20 to 30 years. Then the land goes back to farming. Suburbs are forever." Patricia called that evening. Her voice was tight, stressed in a way I hadn't heard since she was in college dealing with finals and job interviews. "Daddy, Trevor's attorney says you're trying to block our sale with some kind of technicality. It's not a technicality, Patricia. It's a legal right your great-grandfather built into the deed to protect the family land. But we already closed. The money's been transferred. Trevor's already committed to investors based on this purchase. Then Trevor should have researched the property more carefully before making commitments. This isn't fair, Daddy. We made this decision to help you, to make sure you have money for medical treatments and retirement." That stung because I knew she believed it. Patricia genuinely thought she was saving me from financial worry, protecting me from having to work the farm while fighting cancer. Her intentions were good, even if her execution was disastrous. "Patricia, did you ever ask what I wanted?" Silence on the other end. "Did you ever think that maybe I'd prefer to make my own decisions about my land, my health, my future? You're sick, Daddy. You need to focus on getting better, not on managing farm operations." "I'm not dying, Patricia. The doctors say the treatment's working. I've got years left, maybe decades. And in all those years, I'd like to have some say in what happens to the land my grandfather bought with his army pay. But the money, Patricia, there are things more valuable than money. Your great-grandfather understood that. Your grandmother understood it. Your mother understands it. Maybe it's time you learned it too." She hung up without saying goodbye. Carol looked at me from across the kitchen table. That was harsh. Maybe. But she needed to hear it. Patricia's been treating me like a problem to be managed instead of a person to be consulted. Sometimes the truth hurts. She's scared, David. Scared of losing you, scared of making the wrong decisions, scared of disappointing Trevor. Then she should have talked to me before selling the farm our family's owned for 80 years. The legal maneuvering began in earnest the next morning. Jennifer Morrison filed an emergency motion with the county court, claiming that my right of first refusal was invalid due to the time gap between the original deed and Patricia's sale. She argued that mineral rights and surface rights were separate properties, making me an unrelated party to the transaction. Our family attorney, Robert Hayes, had been handling our legal work for 25 years. Bob was 72, a Nebraska native who'd grown up on a farm before going to law school on a scholarship. He understood land law the way farmers understood weather, not just the technical details, but how everything connected to everything else. "David, their argument is weak," Bob told me over the phone. "The right of first refusal specifically covers any transfer of surface rights, regardless of mineral ownership. Ray wrote it that way deliberately. He wanted to make sure the family could always protect the land from unsuitable buyers." How long will this take to resolve? Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on how hard they want to fight. But I'll tell you this. Palmer's attorney is making a mistake by rushing to court. The judge is going to want to see all the documentation, and when he does, our position is rock solid. That afternoon, Trevor showed up at our farm again, but this time his confident demeanor was cracked around the edges. He looked like a man who'd been getting bad news from multiple directions: attorneys, investors, probably Patricia. "David, we need to talk." I was in the machine shed checking over the planter for spring work. Even with everything else happening, the corn still needed to go in the ground at the right time. Farming doesn't stop for family drama or legal disputes. About what? This right of first refusal claim. My attorney says it could tie up the property for months. I set down my wrench and looked at him. Could be. David, I've got investors who've committed significant capital based on this acquisition. If we can't move forward with development, I'm looking at serious financial exposure. Then you should have done your homework before buying. Trevor's composure slipped further. "Look, I understand you're upset about Patricia making this decision without consulting you. But the sale is done. The money's been transferred. We've already started architectural planning, engineering studies, environmental assessments, all based on assumptions that turned out to be wrong. What do you want? Money? We can negotiate a settlement that gives you more than the original sale price." I almost felt sorry for him. Trevor was used to solving problems with money, but some problems couldn't be bought off. "Trevor, this isn't about money. It's about understanding what you bought and what you didn't buy. I bought 640 acres of farmland with development potential. You bought the right to put houses on top of the biggest oil discovery in Nebraska history. You might want to think about how that affects your development timeline." For the first time, Trevor looked genuinely confused. "What oil discovery?" "Continental Energy's been surveying our section for 6 months. The results came back yesterday. 250 million barrels of recoverable reserves right underneath your planned suburban development." Trevor stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "That's impossible. There's no oil in Nebraska. Tell that to Continental. They're preparing to offer $2.56 million annually for drilling rights, plus 18% royalties on production." I watched Trevor's face as he did the math. Even his MBA-trained mind could calculate what 18% of 250 million barrels meant in dollar terms. His confident expression dissolved completely. "But Patricia said she didn't mention anything about mineral rights, because Patricia doesn't understand the difference between surface rights and mineral rights. She sold you the right to build houses. I still own the right to drill for oil underneath those houses." Trevor pulled out his phone, probably to call Jennifer Morrison or Patricia or both. I went back to working on the planter while he paced around the machine shed, talking in increasingly urgent tones to whoever would answer his calls. When he finished, Trevor looked like a man who'd just discovered his lottery ticket was a counterfeit. "David, if you exercise this right of first refusal, what happens to our development investment? You get your money back. Same price you paid Patricia, same terms. And the oil lease goes to whoever owns the mineral rights, which would be me after I buy back the surface rights." Trevor sat down on an overturned bucket, holding his head in his hands. "Patricia's going to kill me. Her father's going to kill me. My investors are going to sue me into bankruptcy." For the first time since this whole mess started, I actually felt sympathy for Trevor. He wasn't a bad person, just a city boy who'd gotten in over his head in rural waters he didn't understand. "Trevor, can I give you some advice?" He looked up. "What?" "Stop fighting the inevitable. Cut your losses, take the money back, and find another development project. One where you actually own what you think you're buying. But the legal fees alone are going to cost hundreds of thousands, the investor commitments, the planning costs. That's the price of not doing proper due diligence. You can pay it now, or you can pay it later after months of legal battles you're going to lose anyway. Trevor stood up, straightened his designer jacket, and tried to recover some dignity. This isn't over, David. Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet. After he left, I called Kevin Walsh to update him on the legal situation. David, Continental's board is getting nervous about the complications. They want assurance that we can move forward with development once you regain clear title. How long before they need a final answer? 60 days, maximum. If this legal mess isn't resolved by then, they'll have to consider other properties. That timeline added pressure I didn't need. If Trevor's legal challenges dragged on too long, I could lose both the farm and the oil lease. Patricia's mistake could end up costing us everything Ray had built over 3 generations. But sometimes the right choice is also the risky choice. Ray had understood that when he bought 640 acres with nothing but faith in Army discharge pay. Now it was my turn to have faith that justice and preparation would win out over legal maneuvering and deep pockets. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Judge Margaret Sullivan presided over property disputes in our county, and she had a reputation for no-nonsense decisions based on law rather than emotion. She'd grown up on a farm herself before going to law school, which meant she understood both the legal complexities and the practical realities of agricultural life. Bob Hayes and I arrived at the courthouse early, carrying 3 boxes of documentation that traced our land ownership back to Ray's original purchase in 1943. Every deed transfer, every legal modification, every recorded easement and restriction. The kind of meticulous record-keeping that farmers learn to maintain because land is the foundation of everything else. Jennifer Morrison arrived with Trevor and Patricia, plus 2 junior attorneys carrying their own boxes of legal briefs and case precedents. Patricia looked pale and stressed, avoiding eye contact with me. Trevor appeared to have recovered some of his corporate confidence, but there was something brittle about it, like a man trying to convince himself as much as everyone else. Judge Sullivan reviewed the preliminary motions, then asked both sides to present their core arguments. Your Honor, Jennifer Morrison began, the plaintiff's claim is based on an outdated deed restriction that has no bearing on a modern real estate transaction. Mr. Palmer purchased these surface rights in good faith, with proper title insurance and legal representation. The alleged right of first refusal is invalid because it references parties and conditions that no longer exist. Bob Hayes stood up when she finished. Your Honor, the right of first refusal has been continuously recorded in county records for 80 years. It specifically covers any transfer of surface rights, regardless of mineral ownership or family relationships. The language is clear and unambiguous. Mr. Palmer's failure to research these restrictions before purchasing doesn't invalidate them. Judge Sullivan studied the original deed for several minutes, then looked up. Ms. Morrison, your client's title insurance company didn't flag this restriction during their review. Your Honor, the restriction was deemed obsolete due to the passage of time and changed circumstances. Mr. Hayes, has this right ever been exercised before? No, Your Honor. This is the first time anyone outside the family has attempted to purchase the land, which means the restriction has never been tested or invalidated by previous court action. That's correct, Your Honor. Judge Sullivan made notes, then addressed the central issue. Ms. Morrison, I'm troubled by your client's claim of good faith purchase. The right of first refusal is clearly recorded and easily discoverable through standard title research. Why didn't your client's due diligence process identify this restriction? Jennifer Morrison glanced at Trevor before answering. Your Honor, my client relied on professional title examination and insurance. The restriction was disclosed but deemed legally questionable. But your client proceeded with the purchase anyway, knowing there was a potential legal challenge? Your Honor, the restriction appeared to be dormant and unenforceable. Judge Sullivan frowned. Ms. Morrison, hoping a legal restriction is unenforceable is not the same as verifying that it's unenforceable. Mr. Palmer assumed a known risk. I could see Trevor's confidence cracking again. His attorney had just admitted that they'd gambled on the legal validity of Ray's deed restriction and lost. Mr. Hayes, Judge Sullivan continued, assuming the right of first refusal is valid, what's your client's timeline for exercising it? Mr. Hartwell is prepared to complete the purchase immediately, Your Honor. Same price, same terms as the original sale. And he has the financial capability to honor that commitment? Bob glanced at me and I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Financing is already arranged. That wasn't entirely true yet, but Kevin Walsh had assured me that Continental would advance the necessary funds against the future lease payments. Oil companies understood the value of securing mineral rights, even if it meant temporarily financing surface purchases. Judge Sullivan reviewed her notes one more time, then delivered her ruling. The right of first refusal is valid and properly exercised. Mr. Palmer must either complete the resale to Mr. Hartwell at the original purchase price, or accept that his development project will proceed subject to Mr. Hartwell's retained mineral rights and any associated drilling operations. Trevor's face went white. Jennifer Morrison immediately stood up. Your Honor, we request a 30-day stay to consider our options and potential appeal. Motion denied. This is a straightforward property law matter, not a constitutional question. Mr. Palmer has 10 days to decide whether to complete the resale or proceed with development under the existing mineral rights structure. Outside the courthouse, Patricia finally approached me. Daddy, I don't understand what just happened in there. You sold the farm to Trevor without understanding what you were selling or checking what restrictions existed. Now Trevor has to decide whether to sell it back to me or try to build houses on top of an oil field. But the money, we thought we were helping you. Patricia, did it ever occur to you to ask what I wanted help with? She looked genuinely confused. You're fighting cancer. You need to reduce stress, not worry about farming operations. I need to make my own decisions about my life and my land. You treated me like I was already incompetent. Carol had been waiting by our truck, but she walked over when she saw Patricia starting to cry. Patricia, honey, your father's not angry at you for wanting to help. He's hurt that you didn't trust him enough to include him in the decision. But Trevor said we needed to act quickly, that the market window might close. Trevor was wrong about a lot of things, I said, including his understanding of what he was buying. Patricia wiped her eyes. What happens now? Now Trevor decides whether to cut his losses or double down on a bad investment. And you decide whether you want to learn about the family land you tried to sell, or whether you prefer to stay in Chicago and let other people make decisions for you. I want to learn, she said quietly. I want to understand what I almost destroyed. That evening, Tom Bradley stopped by the farm. He'd been at the courthouse along with several other neighbors who'd heard about the hearing through the Rural Information Network. David, word is you won. That true? Judge ruled in our favor. Trevor has 10 days to decide what he wants to do. Tom grinned. Bet he wishes he'd talked to some local folks before buying. We could have told him about Ray's deed restrictions. Probably wouldn't have listened. City people think they're smarter than farmers. Well, this city person just got educated. You going forward with Continental? If Trevor sells back, yes. If not, it gets complicated. Either way, sounds like the community's going to benefit. Oil development means jobs, tax revenue, maybe some infrastructure improvements. That's the plan. Ray always said the land should take care of the people who take care of it. Trevor's decision came on day 8. He called Bob Hayes directly instead of going through his attorney, which told me he'd finally accepted reality. When you're ready to surrender, you don't waste money on lawyers to negotiate the terms of your defeat. Mr. Hayes, my client accepts the court's ruling. We'll complete the resale to Mr. Hartwell at the original purchase price. Bob called me immediately. David, it's over. Trevor's selling back. We can close as early as Friday if you're ready. I was ready. Kevin Walsh had arranged the financing through Continental's Land Acquisition Fund, structured as an advance against future lease payments. The oil company understood that controlling both surface and mineral rights eliminated complications that could delay development for years. Set it up, Bob. I want this finished. That afternoon, I drove to Patricia's hotel in town. She'd been staying there since the court hearing, probably afraid to face me or Carol until she understood what came next. I found her in the lobby, looking lost in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager dealing with her first real disappointment. Daddy, Trevor's selling back. We close Friday. She nodded, but didn't seem relieved. What about Continental Energy? Lease signing is scheduled for next week. $256 million annually for 20 years, plus 18% royalties on production. Patricia stared at me. Daddy, I cost you $51 million in guaranteed lease payments alone, not counting the royalties. You made a mistake, a big one, but it's not irreversible. How can you not hate me? I sat down in the chair across from her. Patricia, I spent 2 tours in the Marines learning that mistakes in judgment happen to everyone. The question isn't whether you make mistakes, it's whether you learn from them. Trevor wants a divorce. He says I destroyed his reputation with investors. Maybe. Or maybe this taught him that there are things more important than quarterly profits and development timelines. He's talking about moving back to Chicago, starting over with a different firm. I thought about Trevor's breakdown in my machine shed, the way he'd looked when he realized the magnitude of what he'd misunderstood. Patricia, what do you want? Not what Trevor wants, not what you think I want. What do you want? She was quiet for a long time. I want to understand the land. I want to learn why great-grandfather structured the deed the way he did, why you've spent 35 years protecting something I tried to sell in one afternoon. That's going to take time, and it's going to mean getting your hands dirty. I know, I'm ready for that. Friday's closing took place at the county courthouse. Trevor looked like a man who'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks, but he signed the papers without argument. Patricia was there too, watching as the land officially returned to family ownership. Judge Sullivan handled the transaction personally, which wasn't required but demonstrated the community interest in seeing this resolved properly. Mr. Hartwell, it's not often we see 3 generations of land ownership preserved this way. Your grandfather would be proud. Yes, ma'am, I think he would. After the papers were signed and notarized, Trevor approached me one last time. David, I owe you an apology. I should have researched the property more carefully before assuming I knew what I was buying. Trevor, you're not a bad man. You just got in over your head in waters you didn't understand. What's next for you? Oil development, but done right. Continental understands that farming comes first. When the wells are depleted in 20 years, this will still be agricultural land. Trevor nodded. For what it's worth, I hope it works out. It will. And Trevor? Next time you're looking at rural property, talk to the local farmers first. They know things that don't show up in title searches. Monday morning, Kevin Walsh arrived with Continental's lease documents and a check for the first year's payment. $2.56 million made out to Hartwell Family Trust. More money than Ray had seen in his entire lifetime, more than Dad had ever imagined possible. David, Continental's board is excited about this partnership. The geological data suggests this could be our most productive field in Nebraska. When do you start drilling? Environmental permits should be approved within 90 days. First well could be operational by Christmas. Patricia had driven out from town to witness the lease signing. She'd been staying at the farm for 3 days, learning about equipment maintenance, crop rotation, and the 100 daily decisions that keep an agricultural operation running. Daddy, can I ask you something? What's that? Would you teach me about the mineral rights management? I want to understand how to protect what great-grandfather built. Carol smiled from the kitchen doorway. I think that's the smartest thing you've said since you got home. That evening, the 3 of us sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. The same sky Ray had watched 80 years ago when he'd walked these fields and seen possibilities that nobody else could imagine. Patricia, I said, farming isn't just about the land or the money. It's about understanding that some things are too important to sell, no matter what someone offers to pay. I'm beginning to understand that. Good. Because someday, this will be your responsibility. She looked surprised. Even after what I did? Especially after what you did. You made a mistake, but you learned from it. Ray would have approved of that. Continental's first well was spudded 3 months later. Initial production exceeded all projections. 600 barrels per day from a formation that showed no signs of depletion. Our royalty checks started arriving quarterly, each one representing more money than most farmers saw in a decade. 6 months later, Continental had 3 wells in production across our section. The oil flowed better than anyone had projected, a combined daily output of 1,800 barrels that translated to monthly royalty checks exceeding $400,000. The kind of money that made farmers in 3 counties start researching their own mineral rights and calling Continental's land department. Patricia had moved back to Nebraska permanently by then. Her divorce from Trevor was finalized in November, handled quietly through their respective attorneys without the bitterness I'd expected. Trevor had returned to Chicago and started working for a different development firm, probably a wiser man for his expensive education in rural property law. Daddy, the quarterly tax payment is due next week, Patricia said, looking up from the kitchen table where she'd spread out ledgers and financial statements. She'd been learning to manage the oil revenue accounts, working with our accountant to understand the complexities of depletion allowances, royalty taxation, and long-term financial planning. How much this time? $340,000 to the IRS, $85,000 to the state. The accountant says we're on track for $2.8 million in federal taxes this year alone. Even paying that much in taxes felt like a victory. It meant the oil production was exceeding every projection Continental had made. More importantly, it meant Ray's 80-year vision was finally paying off for the family and the community. The town of Millerville, population 847, had seen changes that nobody could have imagined a year earlier. Continental's operations brought 150 new jobs to the county: drilling crews, equipment operators, truck drivers, administrative staff. The school district received an additional $400,000 annually in oil-related property taxes. The county had paved 12 miles of rural roads to handle increased truck traffic. Tom Bradley stopped by one afternoon while Patricia and I were checking on the winter wheat. His own mineral rights lease with Continental had been signed 3 months earlier, guaranteeing him $180,000 annually for his 480 acres. "David, never thought I'd see the day when farming became the side business," Tom said, grinning. "It's not a side business. The oil's temporary. This ground will be producing corn and soybeans long after the wells are depleted. Still, it's changed everything. My grandson's talking about staying in Nebraska instead of moving to Denver after college. Says there might be opportunities here worth considering." That was the real victory, in my opinion. Young people staying in rural communities instead of abandoning them for urban opportunities. Oil revenue was providing economic stability that could support local businesses, improve infrastructure, and give the next generation reasons to build their lives here. Patricia had been quiet during our conversation with Tom, but she spoke up after he left. "Daddy, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "What happens when the oil runs out? 20 years seems like a long time, but it's not forever. Then we use the money we've made to ensure the farming operation is stronger than it's ever been. New equipment, improved drainage, maybe some additional land purchases. The oil revenue should set us up to farm at a higher level for the next 50 years. Is that what great-grandfather would have wanted? I thought about Ray walking these fields in 1943, seeing possibilities that nobody else could imagine. Ray understood that wealth was a tool, not a destination. He wanted the land to support the family and the family to support the land. That doesn't change whether the money comes from corn production or oil royalties. Dr. Rodriguez had cleared me for full activity in October. The cancer was in complete remission, blood work normal, scans clean. I'd beaten the disease that had started this whole crisis, and I'd emerged stronger financially than I'd ever dreamed possible. Carol and I had used some of the oil money to travel, visiting Ray Hartwell's birthplace in Montana and taking a cruise through Alaska that we'd talked about for 20 years but never thought we could afford. But mostly we'd stayed home, enjoying the farm and watching Patricia learn to understand what she'd almost lost. "Daddy, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "All right. Do you forgive me for selling the farm?" I stopped walking and looked at her. "Patricia, I forgave you the day you said you wanted to learn. Forgiveness isn't about pretending mistakes didn't happen. It's about choosing to move forward together despite them. But I cost us months of worry, legal fees, almost destroyed great-grandfather's legacy. You also learned that there are things more valuable than money, that family decisions should involve family members, that land ownership carries responsibilities along with benefits. Those are lessons worth a few months of worry. I'll never make a mistake like that again. You'll make different mistakes. Everyone does. The goal is to make them less expensive and less catastrophic as you get older." That evening, Continental's site manager called to report that well number 4 had hit the formation at record depth and was testing at 800 barrels per day initial production. Our section was proving to be the geological sweet spot that Kevin Walsh had predicted, the kind of discovery that could rewrite the economics of Nebraska oil production. "Patricia," I said after hanging up, "looks like you'll have plenty of oil revenue to practice managing." "Daddy, that's not funny. Do you realize we could be looking at $100 million in lifetime royalties?" I realize we're looking at enough money to ensure this farm stays in the family for the next 4 generations. That's what matters. And if I have children someday, then we'll teach them what Ray taught Dad, what Dad taught me, what I'm teaching you. Some things are too important to sell. 2 years after Patricia sold the farm, I stood on the same ridge where Ray used to walk, watching Continental's crew complete well number 12. The derrick lights looked like a small city against the Nebraska darkness, but during daylight hours, you could barely tell the industrial operation was there. The company had kept its promises about environmental protection and agricultural compatibility. Our total production was now averaging 8,400 barrels per day across 12 wells. Monthly royalty checks had stabilized at $1.8 million, with annual lease payments of $2.56 million, providing guaranteed baseline income regardless of oil prices. The numbers were almost impossible to comprehend for someone who'd spent 35 years worrying about corn prices and equipment repairs. Patricia walked up beside me, carrying 2 cups of coffee in the evening chill. She'd been managing the oil revenue accounts for 18 months, now working with financial advisors to establish trusts and investment strategies that would preserve wealth across generations. She understood numbers in ways that Ray never could have imagined, but she also understood land in ways her MBA program never taught. Daddy, I've been thinking about what you said last year, about using oil money to strengthen the farming operation. What about it? I want to propose something. What if we used part of the revenue to help other family farms in the county? Low-interest loans for equipment, technical assistance for younger farmers, maybe even help with mineral rights negotiations? I looked at her in the darkness. You're talking about a lot of money, Patricia. We're making more money than we can spend in 3 lifetimes. Ray wanted the land to support the community as well as the family. This would be a way to honor that. What would Carol think? I already asked her. She said it sounds like something great-grandmother would have supported. Ray's wife Dorothy had died when Patricia was 5, but she'd been known throughout the county for helping neighbors during hard times, bringing food to families with sick children, organizing community support during the farm crisis of the 1980s, the kind of quiet generosity that rural communities depended on. How would it work? I've been talking to the county extension office and the farm bureau. They could help identify farmers who need assistance but can't qualify for traditional bank loans. We provide the capital, they provide oversight and technical support. You've really thought this through. I've had time to think about a lot of things, including what I almost destroyed when I sold the farm. Over the past 2 years, Patricia had changed in ways that went beyond her move back to Nebraska. She still had her MBA analytical skills, but she'd developed farmer's patience, the ability to think in seasons and years instead of quarters and fiscal periods. She'd learned to read weather patterns, understand soil conditions, and appreciate the complex relationships that made agricultural communities work. There's something else, she said. I want to ask Carol if she'd help me plant a garden next spring. A real garden, not just flowers. Your grandmother would have liked that. I never really knew great-grandmother, but I'm starting to understand what she and Ray built here. It wasn't just about owning land, it was about being part of something bigger. Carol joined us on the ridge, wrapped in the quilted coat she'd worn for evening chores for 20 years. What are you two plotting out here? Patricia wants to use oil money to help other farmers, and she wants to learn gardening. Carol smiled. Both sound like good ideas. The gardening might be harder than managing million-dollar accounts. Why? Because gardens don't care about your spreadsheets. They grow on their own schedule, need attention when they need it, not when it's convenient. A lot like farming, actually. The 3 of us stood quietly for a while, listening to the distant hum of drilling equipment and watching stars appear in the clear Nebraska sky. The same stars Ray had seen when he'd walked these fields 80 years ago, planning for a future he wouldn't live to see, but trusting that his family would protect what he'd built. Patricia, I said, I want to ask you something. What? If someone came to you tomorrow with an offer to buy the farm, let's say $50 million for the surface rights, no complications, clean transaction, what would you say? She didn't hesitate. I'd say the farm isn't for sale. Even $50 million. Daddy, there are things money can't buy back once you've lost them. I learned that the hard way. And the oil rights? What if Continental offered to buy those outright for $200 million? Same answer. Ray didn't preserve this for one big payday. He preserved it so we could take care of the land, and the land could take care of us. That's when I knew she really understood. Patricia had started this journey as a business school graduate who saw assets and returns on investment. She'd become a farmer who understood that some things were worth more than their market value. 6 months later, the Hartwell Agricultural Assistance Fund was operational with an initial endowment of $5 million. Patricia administered the program, working with local farmers to provide equipment loans, technical support, and mineral rights guidance. The fund had already helped 23 families avoid foreclosure and expand their operations. Trevor sent a Christmas card that year, the first contact we'd had since the divorce was finalized. He was engaged to a woman from Chicago, working for a suburban development firm, apparently doing well. He'd learned from his Nebraska experience, but he'd learned different lessons than Patricia had. I'm 61 now. My cancer remains in remission, and the doctors say I have every chance of living another 20 years or more. Long enough to see Patricia establish her own family, maybe teach another generation about land stewardship and long-term thinking. The farm that Patricia sold for $1.2 million has generated over $45 million in oil revenue and is projected to produce another $150 million over the remaining life of the field. But more importantly, it's still farmland, still producing corn and soybeans, still supporting the community Ray envisioned when he bought 640 acres with his Army discharge pay. Some lessons are worth $15 million, some are worth even more. 4 words changed everything. Daddy, I sold the farm. But the words that mattered most came later. The farm isn't for sale.